Perfect. Thanks, Jesse. So hi to everybody. Nice to virtually meet you, I guess, is sort of where we sit right now. So as Jesse said, my name is Jeff Rock. I'm an investment advisor and financial planner with RBC Dominion Securities in Aurelia. I've been doing this type of work now for just about 12 years. I live just outside of town, actually, with my wife and 4 kids, which usually gets a laugh, but I can't hear you guys laughing. So I don't know if 4 kids is funny for you or not, but most people tend to see it that way. What I do in my day-to-day life is I'm focused on exactly what we're talking about today. I talk to people about saving and investing and the strategies that are going to get them towards their goals. I help people from 25-year-olds up to 95-year-olds. And a lot of the information that we're going to cover today is actually built into the resources that I share with them on a day-to-day basis. So you'll get to have a bit of a look into that. A little touch of background on Dominion Securities and RBC. So Dominion Securities is what's known as a full service brokerage with 100 plus years of investing in wealth management. And then RBC, you probably know it. It's considered one of the big 5 banks in Canada. And they've been helping folks for over 150 years with their financial planning needs. So a lot of background and a lot of information to be able to bring forth to you guys here today. So I've put together just a little bit of an agenda for us to work with here today. And just bear with me while I work with the tech. There it goes there. Okay. So there's a few areas that I want to cover off today, but I was asked to come really to talk about savings and investing. We're going to go through a lot of information on a very high level, but what I want to encourage each of you to do is to take 1 or 2 of the areas that you really find stand out to you. And if there's anything confusing about it, anything that you want to know more about, please do follow up, whether you ask a question in the Q&A towards the end, or if you want to, connect through an avenue like LinkedIn or email. Feel free to reach out. This is really just about scratching the surface today. And we're not going to be able to go into, all of the depth that, you might like to, if you're going to learn about some of these individual areas. But in a general sense, what we're going to talk about is budgeting and saving, setting goals for yourself, financial planning, the different account types that are out there for investing. We'll talk a bit about risk and diversification, and then we'll get into some actual investment vehicles where you can go and make these purchases and put some of this information into play. So let's talk a little bit about what we do with money. And I just want to pause for a second and kind of preface a lot of our conversations. When we get into saving and investing, the first step is really to actually have money to save or to invest. There are going to be some stages in your life, and there are going to be some folks where this, unfortunately, is just not an opportunity. But for those of you who do have the ability to make a saving or an investing decision, I hope that you do so. And that when you are in a situation where you have money to put to work, that you're trying to find a balance between all of these different areas that you have in front of you on the screens. So when we have money come to us, typically in the form of income, or it may be a gift, or it could be other areas. When you have money come to you, you will then have a choice whether you want to save that money, invest the money, spend it, or give it away. Now, I'm not talking about just giving it to your friends, we're a little more strategic than that, but it could be sharing with family members, it could be giving to charity, it could take any number of forms. But really, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find a balance between all of these areas. Now, as I mentioned before, you may come into a point in your life where the only thing that you can do is spend your money. You just don't have any other option. But realistically, we want to be in a position where that's not the long-term position where we're always spending our money. We really want to be in a position where we can find the time to save, invest, and then hopefully even give some away. We are a charitable country, in Canada, and if we can participate in that, then there's a lot of value in doing that for sure. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a look at budgeting. Okay, and we just covered off sort of the 4 different areas where money may go. But at the end of the day, what I want people to feel encouraged to do is to actually create a budget for yourself. Now, if you're not already budgeting, don't worry. I meet a lot of people at all ages and stages who don't budget. Statistically speaking, less than half of Canadians actually do budget. But I'll let you in on a little bit of a secret here. The wealthier people are, the more likely they are to budget, which I've always found to be quite interesting. You know, you would think that the folks that don't have access to as much money might actually need to take the step to put a budget together. But in fact, it's quite the opposite. It's those that tend to have money who are doing the budgeting. And I really believe that that's one of the keys to their successes. So, you know, okay, well, what is a budget? Well, a budget is just simply an analysis of, you know, what's the money that you have coming in. So as I mentioned before, it's typically income where you're going to have money coming in. You know, don't rely on that lottery winning. It might happen, but that's not really where we should be, you know, sort of putting all of our trust. So you're going to have money coming in and you're also going to have money going out. And budgeting is typically an evaluation of those two things. Where am I? Where do I stand? Is there more coming in than going out, or vice versa? And where does that leave me? Now, traditionally, when we take a look at budgeting, it's the formula across the top of your screen that we actually see put into practice most often. So what folks will do is they'll take a look at the income that they have coming in, they'll subtract out the expenses that are in place, and then whatever's left over gets put into some sort of a savings plan. Now, where I've seen folks really become successful is when they flip that formula around. And this is what I'm going to encourage you to do. Think of your money in terms of what is the income that I have coming in? What is it that I'm saving towards? And then whatever's left over goes towards my expenses. Now, a lot of you who are listening to this call today, you're students. When you graduate, you're going to be coming out, you're going to be starting into a career of your own, and you're going to have this essentially a blank slate to work with, where you're going to be able to really set the tone with your budgeting going forward. And I do believe, because I've seen this in practice so often, that if you come out of school and you start with a mindset towards savings, then in the long run, you're really going to thank yourself for that. Now, at the end of the day, when we take a look at the second formula here, income minus savings equals expenses, what this really comes down to is the concept of paying yourself first. I used to actually use this phrase quite a bit back when I was working at the bank, and I actually remember at one point having quite the debate with a young customer of the bank who was quite insistent that buying the upgraded bindings for his snowboard equated to a good investment, and that was what was meant by pay yourself first. I argued with him then, and I would argue with him now. That's not really what we're talking about. But paying yourself first is about paying your future self. Okay, and I do promise you that if you take the step and you prioritize savings and you make sure that you're the first one to get paid, you know, your retired self will look back on your just out of school self, and you know, you'll be very thankful that you made this move to prioritize savings. Now, if we take a look a little bit deeper, and this is something that we'll try and make sure that you have access to, but you know, these are actually practical steps that you can take when it comes to laying out a budget in the way that I just mentioned. So, you know, steps are very simple. First, list your incomes. So where's your money going to come from? Second, list the goals that you want to save for. Now, typically we recommend that folks are saving 10% of their income. So 10% of your paycheck actually goes into some sort of a savings plan, and that you also save for a 3-month emergency fund. Okay, so what that will look like is making sure that you have 3 months worth of savings and expenses, or if you like, 3 months worth of income, whichever you want to target, but that you have that money sitting somewhere ready to go, so that if life throws you any surprises, you don't have to completely give up on the hard work that you've done for your budgeting. You can really just sort of go back to what you're used to And now you've got that 3-month cushion to, allow you to replace your income or get well if you've been injured or what have you, whatever the emergency is. You've made sure that you've put your money aside and that you've got that. So now that you've looked at your incomes and your savings, well, then you can move into what are my expenses? Okay, so take a look at your fixed expenses. What is it? When we talk about your needed fixed expenses, what do you have to pay to keep a roof over your head? Do you need a car payment? Certain things like that. Next, look at your flexible needed expenses. So, here we talk about cell phone and internet and TV and groceries and things that they're necessities. You need that internet access, especially now that we're all working from home. But to what level do you want to spend on those, and can you find ways to keep your spending in check? From there, you can look at wanted fixed expenses. You may need a car to get you back and forth to work every day, but you may want a fancier car to get you back and forth to work every day. So it's important for you to, kind of understand the difference between the two and make these decisions sort of in this prioritized list. And then finally, you can look at your wanted flexible expenses. But again, at the end of the day, the goal in this practice is to get you into a position where you're looking at what is your income, you're prioritizing your savings, and then whatever's left over is going towards expenses. And again, this is where we're looking at that trade-off of, if I save now, I can really help my future self out. Think about what you're doing right now. You're in school, you're educating yourself, you're helping your future self out by steps you're taking today. Prioritizing savings is another step that you can take to do just the same. Okay. So what are we going to save for? Now, what I've just gone through, every single one of you on the call today can do the exercise in the manner that I've just presented it. Again, what are your incomes? What are you saving for? Whatever's left over goes towards expenses. But where this is going to deviate for everybody is in your goals. You're all going to have different things to save for. Some of you will want to travel and some of you won't. Some of you will want season tickets to sports. Maybe these are bad examples because we can't do these things right now. I don't know. Some of you will want to retire at 55 and some of you won't. Some of you will want a fancy car and some of you won't. Your goals are going to be very, very different and very unique. And it's important for you to understand really what these goals are so that you know what you're saving towards. And then you can kind of look at that 10% that you're saving, we mentioned on the last slide, and say, okay, is that enough, right? Is 10% going to do it for me, or do I need to do a little bit more? So your goals are going to be very unique, but you do really, I really suggest that you spend time thinking of these goals and listing them out. And what you'll find is that your goals are typically going to break down into two broad categories. So those categories are short-term goals and long-term goals. Short-term goals could include a new car, going away for the weekend, purchasing some sports equipment, upgrading your phone, going to some sort of event, or maybe doing a repair in the house. Your long-term goals: buy a house, pay off your debt, fund a child's education, retire, take a big trip around the world, maybe cover some of those larger emergencies or uncovered healthcare expenses that may come up. And the reason why it's very important to break down your goals into these two broad categories is that this is going to help you determine whether it's something that you save for or invest for. And those are two very different distinctions. When you're saving for something, it's typically short term, right? The weekend away is going to come up in a month. I get paid every week. So over my next 4 paychecks, I'm going to put a certain amount aside into savings. But when it comes to your longer term goals, that may not be sufficient, because not only do you want to put money aside every week, but we're talking retirement here. Over the next 30 years, why not put that money somewhere where it can gain interest and growth so that it's actually worth more than it originally was when you put it aside? Okay, so determining whether it's a short or a long-term goal is going to be very important into helping you understand what your next steps are that you want to take from there. Now, you set some goals, you got your budget, you're doing some savings. I want to give you a little bit of a window into what I do. And this is really, if you do your own financial planning, you'll do a bit of this yourself. I mentioned that I'm a financial planner. Well, what does that mean? Well, when I sit down with the clients I work with, and again, they range everywhere from 25 years old to 95 years old, all different backgrounds, all different situations. But what I do is I help them determine, okay, first off, what's the approach that we need to take? Okay, are we really getting into the specifics of what's to come in the future? Or are we just doing some sort of general projections? Second, we look at the wealth stage that you're in. Okay, so are you a recent grad or are you somebody who's about to retire? Okay, depending where you sit, we're going to take different approaches. We're going to go through your goals to make sure that they're realistic. I spend way more time goal setting with folks than I ever thought that I would, but I do that because of how important it is. Okay, goal setting is one of the most important steps that you can take when it comes to savings and investing. So once we know what your goals are, you can take a look at where you're at in your current financial situation. We can move on to creating some projections or plans to see how, setting aside cash flow can help you reach your goals. We can then start to talk about implementing any of the strategies or portfolio decisions that have come out of these plans. And then we continue to monitor and update your plans and projections. Okay, so why did I want to show you this? Well, I really just want you to have an understanding that when it comes to investing and saving, honestly, the most important thing you can do is sit down with that budget and prioritize saving for your future, right? Once you've done that, you're actually a lot of the way towards your goal. But right behind that is going to be the continuous monitoring and updating of any plans that you have in place. Okay, this is a moving target. And as you can imagine, the stage of life that you're in, the situation that you're in when you're 25 years old, well, it's going to be different than when you're 40 years old and maybe you've got kids on the go, when you're 55-year-olds and you're an empty nester, when you're 65 and you're retiring, or when you're 85 and you're thinking about winding down and looking at your estate, okay? So these plans are going to update and they're going to move over time, and it's something that does warrant continuous reviews, and it's something that you should definitely be paying attention to. Okay, so you've made a decision now that you're going to start saving. You understand that there's some planning that goes into it. Let's take a bit of a look here at the different account types that you can use. So where I find that a lot of people kind of go off the rails is they make a decision to invest and then they just invest. And they don't put enough thought into where they should actually invest their money. And in some cases, what the tax implications are of doing those investments. So this is going to be one of those categories where we're definitely just scratching the surface, but I want you to have a bit of an understanding of the different account types that you have at your disposal. So you could choose to put money into your bank account or just a traditional investment account. These are what we call non-registered accounts. The money that you make off of these accounts every year is taxed. Okay, you're going to get a tax slip, you're going to file it, and you're going to have some money to pay based on what you've earned. Okay, it can change from year to year, and it really depends on how much you have saved. On the flip side of that, you have registered accounts, and they're all treated differently. In some cases, like a pension and an RRSP, retirement savings plan, those are taxed when you take the money out. An education savings plan or a disability savings plan, those are taxed at the specific time of the event. So when you're going to school, or again, when you're withdrawing, you see some tax impacts that come from those. There are tax benefits when you contribute to the plans, but there are tax impacts when the money comes out. But the nice thing is that in between those two events, there's no taxes to pay like there would be on a traditional investment account to the left. The final type of account, you have a registered account that is not taxable, which is the tax-free savings account. I just want to pause for a second and make sure that we're very clear here that a tax-free savings account is not a bank account. So if you find yourself using it like a bank account, that's actually not the right application. This is a place where you should be investing for the long term. So definitely something to consider, and make sure that you talk to your advisor to make sure that you're using this account the right way. Okay. So what one of your challenges is here is to look at the money that you're saving. So the money that's coming out of your income to be set aside, determining whether or not you can invest that money, which is going to be determined whether it's a short-term goal or a long-term goal. And once you're investing that money, now you're looking at, okay, what is the right type of account for me to use to actually invest that money? And then depending on what the goal is, so for retirement, you're probably going to use an RRSP. Okay. If it's the dream vacation in 10 years, well, you might use the tax-free savings account. Okay. So just depending on your goal and depending on the taxation of the money that you're investing, you're going to choose a different account type. And now you get to move on to the fun stuff, which is choosing your investment. I guess when I said fun stuff and we saw the skydiving guy come up right after that, those two things are not necessarily connected. But anyways, there it is. Okay. So you've chosen the investment account that you're going to put money into. Now you actually have to choose what you're going to invest in. Okay. So lots of choices coming out here. But when we invest, we're going to be faced with risk, and for anybody who has a little bit of an interest in investments, you hear it described all different ways. It's described as gambling. It's described as taking a chance. If you were watching things back in March, you saw that a lot of investments just went for a tailspin. If you watch headlines on news, you hear, about collapses and drops and all that investing. Well, investing does have its risks, but it's important to define what risk is. Okay, so risk can be many different things. It can be, making the wrong move in a game. It can be, inherent within the activity. If you go skydiving, there is risk associated with that. There can be risk in our day-to-day decisions. You forgot to stop at the gas station on the way home, and I don't know about you guys, but I live out in the country. That can be a very risky decision if I decide not to stop at the gas station. In full disclosure, I didn't make this presentation, so I guess there's risk in choosing the wrong type of pet. If you're picking a skunk as a pet, then that probably explains itself. But anyways, okay. When we look at investing, the risk that folks typically think about is what we call market risk. Market risk is what I just talked about with what markets were doing in March. Market risk is the up and down. When you see a stock chart and you see those highs and lows and you see that movement, that's what we think about when we talk about market risk. We actually like to call that volatility. How high can you go? How low can you go? We think that's a better descriptor of it. But when it comes to investing, period, what you're going to look at is not just market risk, but you're also going to look at the risk of inflation, okay, which is just simply that things get more expensive every year. You're going to look at longevity risk. What happens if you outlive your money? That's something that definitely needs to be taken into account. And there's a lot of other risks, that get a little bit more detailed, which are sort of below that we want to be considering when we're investing our money. Okay, so what do we do about risk? There are actually some steps that we can take. But it's interesting, though, because if you look at these quotes that are coming from two of the most famous investors of all time, Andrew Carnegie and Warren Buffett, even they don't necessarily come together on exactly how you manage risk. Andrew Carnegie says the way to become rich is to put all your eggs in one basket and then watch that basket. Well, this is an industrialist who made much of his wealth in the late 1800s speculating on rail lines. You're not going to follow what Andrew Carnegie did today, because I don't know if you want to buy into rail lines. I don't think that's a great investment. So something a little bit more modern is Warren Buffett. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. It's kind of completely the opposite of what Andrew Carnegie just said. But Warren Buffett's somebody who has made his wealth and his fame managing investment portfolios, right? So, here are two cases of very famous, very wealthy individuals who have very divergent viewpoints of what we can do about risk. But the nice thing is that when you come to actually investing your money, there are a lot of folks who've put time and energy and effort into determining what are the most significant steps you could take to managing risk within your investment. So we'll take a look at a couple of these things here now. And again, I didn't design all the slides, so I don't quite get the jam reference, but it's the stuff around it that's important. When we invest money, what we're ultimately trying to do is we're trying to go from some start point. So if you take a look at this blue arrow that's making its way up and to the right. So our start point would be at the very left-hand side of that arrow. We're trying to move from our current position at the left-hand side of the arrow to a favored position at the right-hand side of the arrow. And we want, over a period of time, for there to have been enough in returns that our money is worth more than it was, more than it was when we started. Okay, we want to be able to be rewarded for that risk that we've taken on in our investments. Well, if you choose a strictly stock-based portfolio, represented by the teal line, you're going to see some volatility. You're going to see some market risk. If you choose a strictly bond-based portfolio, you will also see volatility, market risk. What diversification is bringing together both of those items to actually try and create a nice, smooth experience for yourself, okay, where your risk becomes a little bit more predictable and it's something that you can work with. Okay, so we'll continue to drill down on that concept a little bit, but this idea of diversification, of having items that don't react to the economy and don't react in exactly the same way, and bringing them together to create a better experience for yourself so that you really can feel like you're being compensated for the risk you take on in your investments. It's a very, very important factor to keep in mind. Okay. Now, if all of that wasn't nerdy enough for you, I'm going to nerd out a moment here, so bear with me. But the key to diversification in a portfolio is taking a look at something called negative correlation. Okay, so if you take a look at the chart that's in the middle of your screen here, what you see is that across the bottom right, they've looked at, well, the number of cavities that somebody may have versus the frequency of their toothbrushing on the vertical axis. And what they find is that, which makes sense, the more often you brush your teeth, the less cavities you have. So those are two things that are negatively correlated. Okay, they move in different directions. More teeth brushing means less cavities. Less teeth brushing means more cavities. Okay, as opposed to on the left, the number of people in a household is positively correlated with your monthly cell phone bill, because the more people that are there, the more bills you have and the higher your bill becomes. So when we're creating an investment portfolio, what we want to have are investments that are negatively correlated. So when one increases, the other decreases. When one decreases, the other one increases. And that's where we get that effect that we saw in the last table, where even though we have two items that are both volatile, because they react in opposite direction to market conditions, that volatility is actually negated. And all we're left with is, another term, it's what we call systemic risk. And in systemic risk, what we're actually benefiting from is really just what the market itself does, okay? The economy tends to move upward over time. So that's the systematic risk that we're trying to work with. We're trying to go upwards with the economy over time and take out the detailed fluctuations by buying individual investments. Okay, there's my nerdy moment. Again, I'll just pause here to say that if this is something that you find interesting and you want to know more about, by all means reach out. But I do think it's important to understand that concept of items working opposite of each other when certain things happen in markets, because it helps you understand why diversification is important. Okay, so how it all comes together is that we're going to end up at some point investing in a portfolio. Okay, we're going to buy investments. Your portfolio may have one item in it. You may decide that you're only going to buy one share in Tesla. Fine. One share in Apple. Okay. That is a portfolio, but it is not a diversified portfolio. So when we diversify a portfolio, we're trying to take advantage of that negative correlation relationship. We're trying to make sure that we can participate in the ongoing growth of the economy. And we do that by buying into companies and buying into bonds and stocks in different asset classes, in different sub-asset classes, in different geographies, in different industries, in different sectors. We invest by different currencies. There's a whole slew of different options that we use when we invest to bring together an entire portfolio. This is the part where you guys get to see that this really is live. I made the train joke before, and now here comes a train in front of my house. I'll pause for a second to let that one go by. All right. It's one of the good conductors, so you didn't make too much noise on us. So ultimately now we're going to want to bring together our portfolio. So this is what we call the efficient frontier. What you're looking at here are, okay, sorry, I'll step back a step here. So this chart that we're looking at, if you look up the vertical axis, you're going to see percentage of annualized returns. Okay, so it starts at the bottom at 7% annual returns, lands at the top at 12% annual returns. So this is how much your investments could increase on a year-to-year basis if you choose a portfolio, and we'll talk about those in a second. Across the bottom, what we're looking at is the standard deviation from those returns, okay? So to give you an example, if you're invested in a 40% stock, 60% bond portfolio, based on the timeline that they've done this review, you may expect just over 9% returns with just over 6% in volatility. What that means is you are expecting 9% returns, but you may actually receive 15, or you may only receive 3. Really just depends on what side of that deviation you're on, okay? And it's very, very unlikely that you'll get bang on the returns that you expect, but that gives you a sense of the variation, okay? So what we see is the further to the right you go when you build your portfolio, so let's say you buy a 100% stock portfolio in the top right, it is the portfolio that would provide you the highest percentage annualized return, but it is also the portfolio that would give you the highest deviation from that return, so it has the most volatility, okay? The average Canadian invests 60% of their money into stocks and 40% of their money into bonds. So for you, when you're making your decision, what I really encourage folks to look at is, do you consider yourself to be like the average Canadian, where you would be 60% stock, 40% bond? Do you think you're average risk like they would be? Or do you think you're a little above average or a little below average? Most young investors tend to start out at this level. We call it a balanced investment, 60% stocks. Fairly soon on, as knowledge and confidence builds, we see an increase of risk up to about that 80% stock level. And then as we get closer and closer to needing the money, retirement is usually what we're working towards. But as we get closer and closer to needing our money, we start to reduce the risk, here explained by deviation, and you find yourself getting back to something like a 40% stock portfolio. So again, just sort of scratching the surface on some of these conversations. But what I want you to really take away from this chart is, I can get more return, but in order to get more return, I have to take on more risk. Okay, so we want to make sure that we have a diversified investment portfolio, but we do have to understand this relationship between risk and return. These are very important factors to make sure that we're considering. Okay. Now, in all aspects of our lives, we're confronted with the economic cycle. You know, a lot of you are likely looking at graduating at some point in the next few years. So the economic cycle will affect you in your job prospects. It may affect you in the first house that you look to purchase. It may in fact affect you in, you know, the inflationary pressure on rent and things like that. But where this comes through into investment is as we see economies expand and contract, we tend to see increases and declines in our investment portfolio. The key here, what we are really trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we buy investment portfolios that you can see through from peak to trough to peak to trough and so on. Because as you can see from the chart, there is a long-term overall growth trend. So if you can stick with your investments from peak through trough and back again, you will take advantage of that growth trend in the long term. What you want to be spending time on, though, is an understanding how much volatility can I accept? Where is my place on that efficient frontier that we saw on the last slide? And where should I be in order to guarantee that I will stick with it from start to finish, peak through trough and back again? And again, the whole thing we're trying to do is to make sure that you're participating in that long-term growth trend. Okay, so we bring it together. We've bought that diversified portfolio. But again, I want you to remember where we started. We started all the way back at the beginning with a budget. That has to be absolute step number one. And it is so important that it doesn't matter what wealth people have when they come and talk to me in my day job. I always bring them back to that budget because it is the absolute key to success. The rest of this is the details, but you really do have to start off with how much can I save? Am I saving enough? Follow the planning process through and pick those diversified investments that are going to do what you need them to. There's many, many ways to pick portfolios. You can do it completely yourself if you want to. You know, you could go to a Wealth Simple or a Quest Trade that are very low cost options, but you can make all your investment decisions yourself. You could buy through a mutual fund. You could buy through an index fund, an exchange trade fund, or a segregated fund. I won't go through all the details right now, you know, just to keep time and complexity in mind. But at the end of the day, what I want you to know is all of these decisions that you're faced with, you can make these on your own, but you don't necessarily have to make them on your own. There are investment vehicles out there that make it very, very easy for you. And there are investment professionals out there that can make it very, very easy for you as well. If you can put in the work to look at savings and to set your own goals, there are people out there that will help you. Just make sure that you're speaking to people who are accredited and actually have the expertise to do this. Just because your cousin knows a guy who says that company X is going to double in the next few months and you better get in now, don't go that route. That's not good sound investing. Make sure that you're seeking out those professionals and those investment vehicles that are really going to put you where you need to be to have that success in your future and to take advantage of those long-term growth trends. Okay, there's the disclaimer full of all the fun stuff that legal department, I guess, wants us to have in place.